Hi everyone, my name is TAMARA GIRARDI. I'm an English faculty member for virtual learning. This presentation will offer basics and background for Creative Commons licensing so that you can all get started on locating, reviewing, and implementing Creative Commons licensed material, specifically open education resources in your classes. But first, what is OER and why does this matter? Students have spoken time and time again on student satisfaction surveys at HAC and also in response to an OER survey conducted by the library. And they say that textbook costs are too high. With the rising cost of education across the country and also the current debates and frustrations with looming college debt, reducing costs for students is paramount. One way to do this is by adopting and creating materials that are free to students, and that's what OER is all about. Open Education Resources, or OER, are assignments, podcasts, textbooks, lectures, full courses, and more, essentially any learning tools that can be shared, reused, and remixed at no cost to instructors and students around the world. To make this possible, creators may assign Creative Commons licenses to their works to retain only some rights. So, where does Creative Commons licensing come in and what exactly does that mean? Let's look at some background. Historically, copyright law has protected creations such as works of literature, music, film, art, and so on. The Constitution aimed to limit copyright so that a creator could not have an excessive amount of influence on culture. While the success of the law to meet that objective can certainly be debated, the reality is the length of time that creations are protected by copyright has been extended over the years. Specifically, in 1998, the Sonny Bono Copyright Term Extension Act was enacted. This new law extended copyright by 20 years. Previously, copyright equaled the creator's life plus 50 years. But after the CTEA, copyright now equaled the creator's life plus 70 years. Interestingly, this legislation was enacted just in time to protect Walt Disney's Steamboat Willie Mickey Mouse cartoon for another 20 years. While there are certainly benefits to the existence of copyright, some people challenge the extensions, arguing that all creativity is built on previous forms of creation. In other words, if the law perpetually changes to extend copyright, then many creative works will never enter the public domain. Given the expansion of the internet right around this same time, the tensions between copyright law's restrictions and the desire from people around the world to mash up, mix, and recreate were naturally high. One person in particular who felt this was a Stanford law professor, Lawrence Lessig. Lessig represented Eric Eldred, a web publisher, in a case that went all the way to the Supreme Court. Eldred lost the case, but the result was the Creative Commons, which was in many ways a huge win. In 2002, Creative Commons published a set of free licenses that provide creators the opportunity to share their works in flexible ways, if they want to. Rather than reserving all rights, these creators can reserve some rights. Creations shared under Creative Commons licensing allow for remixing and further sharing of content the world over. The ultimate goal is a community built on open knowledge sharing, and people are eager to adopt this model and join the Creative Commons community. Since its founding, the nonprofit organization Creative Commons continues to grow. Licensing tools are integrated into YouTube, Wikipedia, OpenStax, and more. Creative Commons staff work from offices around the world, and more than 1.4 billion works feature Creative Commons licensing. But using Creative Commons licensed creations in your classes and applying those licenses to your own creations can be complicated. We will talk more about what that means, but let's also clarify copyright first. According to Creative Commons, copyright grants a set of exclusive rights to creators, which means that no one else can copy, distribute, or otherwise use the work in violation of those exclusive rights. There are some other instances when the creator may not retain all rights. For instance, teachers who are creating based on a funding contract with their institutions may not own the product of that grant period. So for an educator to apply a Creative Commons license to their own creations, they must first ensure that they own the copyright to the material. While copyright law is complicated, it's important to note that once a work is created, it is copyrighted, and permissions must be granted for others to use that content. The creator does not have to register their creation to obtain copyright. Doing so provides an official record of the creation and the copyright, but works are protected by copyright law upon creation. That said, it should also be noted that even copyrighted works can be used within reason, as defined by copyright law. For instance, in academia, we often reference works based on the fair use allowance in copyright law. For the purposes of this presentation, though, we will think about how Creative Commons licenses work in tandem with copyright law. In other words, when people create a work, they may decide to share it with others. They may reserve some rights under a Creative Commons license instead of all rights under copyright law. Creative Commons licenses give educators an opportunity to share their resources, and because of this, open education resources are possible. Creative Commons protections, or some rights reserved, come by way of 4 different license elements. Together, these elements create 6 Creative Commons licenses. The first element is included in all 6 licenses. That is the attribution, or BY element. Essentially, this means that all content licensed by Creative Commons must be used with attribution to the original creator. The second element is non-commercial, or NC. 3 of the licenses include this protection. Third is share alike, or SA. Under this element of the Creative Commons licenses, creators may only use SA designated materials if they are also willing to share their creations. This element of the licenses encourages continued sharing of content around the world and is included in 2 of the licenses. Fourth, Creative Commons allows for a no derivatives, or ND element, which restricts reusers from sharing adaptations of Creative Commons licensed works. The no derivatives restriction is used in 2 of the licenses. Again, these 4 elements combine to create 6 Creative Commons licenses. Let's discuss each one in order of the least restrictive to the most restrictive. License 1. This minimally restrictive license is the Attribution License, or CC-BY. Reusers may use this content licensed as attribution for any purpose as long as they give credit. In other words, they may use the content for commercial purposes and/or adapt and modify however they'd like. The only restriction is that attribution to the original work. License 2 is Attribution Share Alike, or BYSA, and this also allows for the same freedoms as the attribution license, but in this case, reusers must be willing to also share their work under the same license. In other words, whatever they create must be shared alike. License 3 is the Attribution Non-Commercial, or BYNC license, and this allows for non-commercial uses, again requiring attribution to the creator. According to legal code, non-commercial is defined as not primarily intended for or directed towards commercial advantage or monetary compensation. Therefore, anyone can reuse content if they meet that definition, whether they identify themselves as commercial or nonprofit. That doesn't matter. License 4 is the Attribution Non-Commercial Share Alike, or BYNCSA. Again, this allows for non-commercial use as previously defined, but in this instance, the reuser must be willing to share their work under the same license. License 5 is the Attribution No Derivatives, or BYND, and this provides some flexibility in use while restricting adaptations. In other words, under this license, reusers cannot make any changes or adaptations to the work, but they can use it for whatever purpose they see fit, even a commercial one. As is the case with all of the licenses, attribution must be present. License 6, Attribution Non-Commercial No Derivatives, or BYNCND, includes attribution and a restriction that no adaptations may be shared. Additionally, any sharing of the work must be done non-commercially. This is the most restrictive of the 6 Creative Commons licenses. So, what is adaptation? Since two of the licenses restrict adaptations of content, it's important to discuss what legally qualifies as a derivative. Small changes, such as correcting spelling errors or changing formatting of content, is not considered an adaptation. On the other hand, combining content with a new medium, for instance, adding music to a short video, is considered derivative. If you're planning to adapt a Creative Commons licensed work, it's best to explore this definition in more detail before doing so. That said, I also want to note that should a reuser violate terms of a Creative Commons license, the best approach is to correct that violation so that the work meets the license guidelines. Reusers have 30 days from when they become aware of the violation to comply, and if they do so, the license will automatically renew for them. In other words, a violation does not mean that the opportunity to use the content is lost forever. Another point of consideration is that licenses for Creative Commons work in tandem with copyright protections. However, copyright protections are not always in place for content. Once a work enters the public domain, all of the Creative Commons protections we've discussed no longer apply. Works in the public domain are free to be used by any means. They can be used for commercial purposes and adapted, and attribution is unnecessary. Likewise, Creative Commons licenses do not apply when a reuser's creation falls under the fair use of copyrighted materials. Additionally, Creative Commons licenses do not apply to patents or trademarks. For the better part of a century, textbook publishers have owned knowledge and charged exorbitant rates for that knowledge by way of expensive textbooks that were updated regularly with few changes but a new edition that would cost more for students. With the invention of the internet, people around the world have greater access to knowledge, and over time, the textbook industry's grip has lessened. Open education resources allow educators and students to share knowledge at no cost for students. These resources could be comprehensive textbooks or courses or smaller educational tools such as lectures, assignments, and podcasts. The benefits are tailor-made materials for your course and your students, and sometimes the task isn't as overwhelming as you might have expected it to be. For instance, you could identify an OER that allows for adaptation and then adapt that text to suit your own needs. There are really many opportunities. Of course, we must move into this space with care and consideration, which is why this presentation details all of the licenses. Furthermore, when we look to adopt OER, we must critically analyze them the same ways we would any textbook we're considering for our students. So let's say you want to dive in. You want to get started with OERs, but you don't know how. Let's have a look at a few places to start. There are online repositories for OER materials, and the Hack librarians have created a LibGuide, a Brightspace shell, and various videos to help you identify those locations and connect with OER materials. So I won't go into detail with all of the repositories. I will, however, give you a few examples. One good place to start is the OER Commons. You can see that on the screen here. There's a search tool where you can enter any aspect of what you might be looking for, select subject, education level. For me, I was looking for OERs for my technical writing course. So I conducted a search here and I found several resources, 64. Some of them are textbooks, some of them are assignments, some of them are entire courses. So for my course, I selected this textbook. If you click on it, you can review a description of the textbook, and you'll also see the license here. So this is licensed with the Creative Commons Attribution Non-Commercial Share Alike. So this means if I use this in my course, I have to attribute it. I cannot use it for commercial gain. And if I modify it in any way, then I would have to assign a share alike license to my derivative or adaptation. So you can select here to view the resource. You can read the book, or you can download the book as a PDF to your machine or any of these other documents. So I've downloaded the PDF, And now I can just take a look and see what's available to me. Here again is the non-commercial share alike. And I can see all of the contents that are included here, and the text itself is a little sparse, so it definitely is ripe for adaptation. So we're back at the OER Commons homepage again, and let's say since I teach writing and literature, let's look at some other aspect within the field of English, and let's look at some poetry. So here we have 142 search results for poetry. So let's go ahead and look at what is poetry. So it gives a good explanation here that this unit is designed to illustrate the techniques behind both the traditional forms of poetry and free verse. You will learn how you can use your own experience to develop ideas and how to harness your imagination. So if we look again, this is an attribution non-commercial share alike, which is the same license as the last resource that we looked at. Again, we can view the resource here. And we see here that this is a free course. So this is more than just a textbook. This is an actual free course. It has 12 hours of study. It's introductory. This is the rating. So at OER Commons, you'll find that there are many different types of resources that you can select. OpenStax is another repository for OER. As you see here, free books, no catch. So you can go ahead and click Find Your Subject. So let's go ahead and just take a look at a pre-algebra textbook and see what we find here. So this license is actually just an attribution license, so this is the least restrictive. The content here can be modified, it can be used for commercial use, and faculty can adapt it any way they see fit. So those are just a few examples of the resources that you can find online that have been licensed by the Creative Commons licenses. As faculty administrators at the college continue discussions of OER, I hope this gives you a sense of the basics surrounding that discussion. A few points to remember: to create a true OER resource, you must be willing to license it so that others can remix, which means not marking the resource as no derivatives. That said, while the true meaning of OER intends reusers can adapt the work, not all Creative Commons licensed works allow for that. Thus, the resource may be free to use, but not available for remixing. As you move forward in exploring possible resources for your courses, be aware of what the different licenses mean. If you ever have questions, you can ask me or a librarian or any of the members of the OER committee at the college. I also wanted to note that I've created this resource through Google Drive that's available to any faculty member at HAC. If you'd like me to share this resource with you, just send me an email. But it lists several websites that can help you start learning more and exploring these concepts. It focuses on accessibility, open education, the background and rationale for sharing of resources, copyright issues, Creative Commons licenses, fair use, general OER guidelines and guidance to keep in mind, and also public domain and Creative Commons licensed materials that you can find online. So repositories of textbooks and other sources of information, photos, anything that you might be able to use and remix as you move forward in this space. At a time when students are struggling with the cost of education and textbooks, especially, this movement is crucial. Thank you so much for taking the time to learn about it, and please let me know if I can help you at all in your OER journey.